Hi guys, it's me, CHD, and welcome to another episode of the podcast where today we are reviewing yesterday's Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. A weekend that was absolutely mental, let's be honest. Compared to what we expected going into the weekend, it was a crazy weekend. The race was not as good as we hoped. It was still a decent race. It was a very competitive one. Close battles really throughout most of the field. So it was a decent, maybe even good race, you could argue. But qualifying, even though it went on seemingly forever, it was absolutely bonkers and created a really exciting grid and led to, as well, a pretty exciting or surprising result, I guess you could say, from this Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Going into the weekend, I thought it was going to be either McLaren domination or, if McLaren didn't win, I thought Ferrari would be the team grabbing victory. But Ferrari and McLaren didn't even get on the podium. So, what do I know? But before we go, obviously, into the teams and how they did, let's get into the results of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Starting with, obviously, the race winner, Max Verstappen. Absolutely dominated this Grand Prix. Thoroughly deserved to win. The pole position lap on Saturday was absolutely brilliant. And then the race, he just dominated from start to finish. I think he led every lap as well. So, yeah, Max again proving why he's the best. George Russell second. Good result for him. Carlos Sainz in third, his first podium of the season. First podium since the final Grand Prix of 2024. And for Williams, I believe that is Williams' first podium since 2017, also in Baku. I might be wrong. Maybe they've had a podium since then, but I'm pretty sure that is the last podium in a proper race. I know George Russell was second at Spa in 2021, but that race didn't really happen. So if you look at actual races, I think that's probably the last proper podium for the Williams team. And that was, same track 8 years ago. And they thoroughly deserved it. Brilliant, brilliant weekend from Sainz, finally delivering for the Williams team. Fourth, Kimi Antonelli. Fifth, Liam Lawson. What a drive from him as well. Nobody expected him to be really in the top 10, I think, this weekend. But third in qualifying and fifth in the race, holding off the pack behind brilliantly. And then in sixth, Yuki Tsunoda. Good weekend from him as well. Still could have been better, but still at least a lot better than what we've seen. Lando Norris, seventh. Disappointing result from Norris, considering what happened to his championship rival and teammate. Lewis Hamilton in 8th, Charles Leclerc 9th, and Isaac Hadjar 10th. And Hadjar was only a couple seconds away from the Ferraris at the end. Hadjar had some good pace in those final laps, but could not, unfortunately, catch up in time. But a great day for Racing Bulls as well as Williams. And mental result from that Grand Prix. Let's get into, though, how that affects the championship standings, starting with the Drivers' Championship. Oscar Piastri, of course, did not finish the Grand Prix after his first lap crash. Lando Norris, though, only gained 6 points, so Piastri is 25 points clear going into the next Grand Prix in Singapore, and we only have 7 races left, plus I think at least a couple sprint races. So Piastri really hasn't lost anything in terms of what he would have been expecting, I think, to lose after his DNF. Max Verstappen, third. Verstappen now 69 points behind in the World Championship. It's possible that he could win his 5th world title. Still very, very unlikely, because he would have to win almost every race between now and the end of the season, and really hope that Piastri and Norris have a very average, at best, if not poor, final few races. But it's possible, and we'll see if he can actually do it. George Russell in 4th, Leclerc 5th, Hamilton 6th, Antonelli back up to 7th and ahead of Albon in the championship, Isaac Hadjar in 9th and Nico Hulkenberg 10th. Carlos Sainz, by the way, has jumped up to 12th in the championship. He was down in 19th place going into the Grand Prix, so a massive result for his Drivers' Championship. On the Constructors' side, McLaren could have won the Constructors' Championship, but they failed to do so. They did not outscore Ferrari by enough in the Grand Prix, and actually, they scored the same amount of points as Ferrari in that Grand Prix. So McLaren will have to wait till Singapore. They'll definitely win the Constructors in Singapore. Mercedes, though, after their good result, are now up to 2nd in the championship. Mercedes only 4 points clear, though, of the winless Ferrari team. Red Bull have closed the gap, though, significantly. Red Bull still in 4th, but only 18 points behind Mercedes in 2nd. If Verstappen does somehow win the Drivers' Championship, Red Bull will probably finish 2nd in the Constructors' Championship. So we'll keep our eye on how the battle for 2nd continues. Williams in 5th and almost 30 points clear of the next team. Williams, with that podium, I think have pretty much secured 5th in the championship unless something incredible happens with either Racing Bulls or Aston Martin in these final few races. Racing Bulls up to 6th. 10 points clear now of Aston Martin. Given how quick Racing Bulls have been this season, I'm pretty confident they'll hang on to 6th. Aston Martin then 7th, Sauber in 8th, Haas in 9th, and Alpine are going to finish last in the championship. Their car is absolutely nowhere at the minute and looks like it's going to be that way for the rest of the season. And the final thing that we always get into before we look at the teams, let's go through the race pace data to see what the pace was like from all the teams in the Grand Prix. Red Bull were the quickest in the Grand Prix by about a quarter of a second per lap over Mercedes. Third quickest, Williams, only 0.3 of a second per lap off the pace of Red Bull. Their race pace was really, really impressive. I thought it would be 6 to 0.7 of a second per lap they would be losing to Red Bull. And if that was the case, they would have ended up struggling to score a point in that Grand Prix. But their race pace was, compared to Red Bull in qualifying, their race pace was actually better, Williams, than it was in qualifying, comparatively to Red Bull. So very impressive performance by Williams. And also Racing Bulls, the 4th best team in the race. Only half a second per lap slower than Red Bull and only just quicker than Ferrari and McLaren in that race. Racing Bulls, we've seen progressively over the season, have got better and better, and since the summer break have been really good. I think they'll keep this form up going forward for the rest of the season. Haas then, big drop off to them. 7th quickest. Haas were really hurt by their grid position. I think they potentially might have been a bit more in there had they not started so low down, but that's the way it went. And then Sauber in 8th, Aston Martin 9th, and Alpine nearly 2 seconds off the pace of Red Bull in that race, and over half a second slower than the next team ahead of them, Aston Martin. Alpine were embarrassing, really, in that Grand Prix. And actually, the only 2 cars lapped in the race were the 2 Alpines. So yeah, Alpine are absolutely finished for this season. Anyway, that's the race pace data and all the stats and facts coming out of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Let's get into how those stats and facts came about, and how the results came about, and get into the teams. And we'll start with the race winners, Red Bull. And Red Bull's car was a lot quicker this past weekend than I expected. That's the first thing I must say. It wasn't entirely down to Max Verstappen as to why he won this Grand Prix. Max was on a different level to everybody else, that is clear to see. But that Red Bull car was quite a bit quicker than expected. I expected it to be, compared to, say, McLaren and Ferrari, say 3 to 0.5 of a second off the pace. When in qualifying, I think maybe Red Bull didn't have the fastest car outright, but they were pretty much on the same pace as McLaren and Ferrari. And in the race, they were comfortably quicker than the rest. So yeah, Red Bull very much surprised me with their pace. And you can tell Red Bull were a lot better than expected because of what Yuki Tsunoda did, qualifying and finishing in 6th place. And Tsunoda should really have finished in 5th, but just didn't do a good enough job to pass Lawson before the end. So Red Bull have taken, by the looks of it, a step forward by maybe a third of a second per lap. Whether that will be enough for Max Verstappen to go and win all the rest of the races, we'll have to see. But they, by the looks of it, have taken a step forward with their car, which is good to see because we need more competition at the front. Max Verstappen, though, in terms of why he got pole, he is the majority of the reason for why Red Bull started on pole. Absolutely super lap, brilliant performance. And then in the race, the Red Bull car was the best car in the race, but with Max in the form he's in, he made it, with him in that car, he made them as a team unbeatable for the rest of the field. And that's why he ended up so far ahead of the next car, George Russell, nearly 15 seconds clear he was in the end. So brilliant performance by Max Verstappen. And yeah, Red Bull look like they have taken that step forward. In Singapore, I still think McLaren will have the fastest car, but Red Bull, they're going to be a bit closer than maybe we were expecting a few weeks ago. Whether they'll be close enough for Max to somehow split the McLarens, or even, dare I say, for Max to get pole, we'll have to see. If Max gets pole in Singapore, then game on it is for the championship. No doubt about it. But I still think it's McLaren's to lose at the next Grand Prix. But with Max Verstappen, he absolutely can win the championship. There is no doubt about that. Again, it is still pretty unlikely, but it is possible, especially with Piastri's DNF. Quick word for Yuki Tsunoda. I still think Tsunoda could have done a better job, but at least it was a lot better of a performance than what we've seen in almost every Grand Prix this season when he's been in that Red Bull, ever since, of course, the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka. So a step in the right direction, but by the sounds of it, Isaac Hadjar is going to be in that Red Bull for 2026, and by the sounds of it, Yuki Tsunoda is now fighting for his Formula 1 future. So he needs to keep up that level of performance, especially if the Red Bull car has got better, and continue putting in consistent points finishes, especially in the top 6. If he can do that, maybe he can keep his seat, or a seat in Formula 1 at Racing Bulls next year. We'll have to see. But a step in the right direction, at least for Tsunoda. But congratulations to Red Bull and Verstappen winning yet again. 2 race wins in a row. And again, we'll see if they can keep it up going into Singapore. I still think it's pretty unlikely, but you just never know when you have such a great driver at the wheel in Max Verstappen. Anyway, let's next go on to, I think, McLaren, because of just the drama of their weekend. Obviously, qualifying was a disaster. Oscar Piastri crashing out in turn 3 in Q3. A rare mistake from Piastri. He's been so good at keeping it consistent and not making really any errors. But this past weekend in Baku, all the errors that maybe were being saved up all came at once. And yeah, poor error in qualifying from him. And then obviously a really bad one in the race as well. For Lando Norris, he failed to capitalise on what Piastri did in qualifying. Had a really poor lap himself and ended up 7th on the grid, which was simply not good enough. In terms of the race, yeah, Piastri was absolutely terrible. Jumped the start and then locked up massively into turn 5 and went into the barriers. 0 out of 10 performance, no doubt about it. But Lando Norris did not capitalise at all, really, on what Piastri did. And didn't even gain on where he started on the grid. And Lando simply was not quick enough. I know after the race he came out and said, yeah, I just couldn't get close enough to Tsunoda. Maybe we weren't actually that quick. McLaren were not as quick as expected, that is for sure. But in terms of him not beating Tsunoda, and I would even say Lawson, I put that down to Lando Norris. I know he had a slow pit stop, which would have helped if it was, a couple seconds quicker. But if Lando Norris performed a bit better in that race, he would have ended up ahead of Tsunoda because he probably would have overtaken Tsunoda on track and then would have had nobody in between him and Lawson, and then probably would have passed Lawson for 5th place. I don't think the McLaren was quick enough to be in the top 4 in the race. So 5th place in that race was definitely doable, but Lando was simply not quick enough. If only McLaren had a faster driver, a better performing driver in a race situation, then I think they would have took 5th place in that Grand Prix. But Lando simply wasn't good enough. The pit stop error didn't help, but I don't think that's why he finished in 7th place. He had plenty of time before that pit stop to properly get up behind Tsunoda and actually go for an overtake, but he was simply too slow. And that's why he ended up pretty much where he did in the end. And yes, 7th is not good enough as far as I'm concerned. Only gained 6 points on Piastri. The gap's still 25 points. That's still a healthy lead for Piastri to have, especially if Oscar does not have another DNF this season. So, in terms of the mental side of this championship battle, Lando is still going to be feeling down because he clearly knows he didn't gain enough on Piastri in this race. But from Oscar's point of view, most importantly, the reason he won't be feeling too down, even though he had a horrible weekend, is because he knows that even though he had a terrible weekend, Lando did not really hurt him for it like he should. So Oscar will just forget about this, move on, and probably get back to his best at the next Grand Prix in Singapore. Lando had to punish him for it, and he didn't. It all started in qualifying as to why he didn't punish him for it. I think if Lando had ended up on the front row, I think Lando probably would have finished on the podium. And that obviously would have been, if he finished 3rd, let's say, that would have been a very good gain of points. Would have put him only 16 points behind with 7 races to go and would have made it a lot closer. But 25 points it is. Horrible weekend for McLaren, the worst weekend of the season. Is this a sign of things to come? Have McLaren dropped off the pace? We'll have to see in Singapore. I still think in Singapore they'll be the quickest team, and I think they'll win the Singapore Grand Prix. I wouldn't be surprised if they finish 1st and 2nd. We'll see what Max or Leclerc maybe could possibly do, but it's McLaren's Grand Prix to lose in Singapore, and they should wrap up as well the Constructors' Championship at the next Grand Prix, something they failed, of course, to do in Baku, despite Ferrari having a dismal Grand Prix. And talking of Ferrari, we will get into them, but not quite yet, because I want to touch on next Mercedes-Benz, who... It was a good weekend overall in terms of, the result they got from the race, but they went about it in a bit of more of a quiet fashion, let's say. 4th and 5th in qualifying, which was a bit disappointing because they had Sainz and Lawson right ahead of them, and they didn't fully take advantage of McLaren and Ferrari messing up the way they did. In the race, though, the pace was good. From George Russell's point of view, he got past... who was it? I think it was Tsunoda after a not-so-great start. Then got held up behind his teammate and Liam Lawson. Thankfully for him, Antonelli and Lawson soon pit, and then Russell put in some really good laps. He was lapping nearly at the same pace as Max Verstappen out front and was able to do an overcut, essentially. And then once he pit, he came out in 2nd place and even did the overcut on Carlos Sainz as well. So it was a really, really good first stint from Russell overall, and that's what got him second place. In the end, it was his speed. So congratulations to Russell for getting second. The best result he could have got. And that's why I rate him so highly, because so consistent he is at getting the best result he can in every Grand Prix, pretty much. That's what the best drivers do. For Antonelli, he will be disappointed that he didn't finish on the podium, but if you go look at the race results, he was only a few seconds behind his teammate in that race. I know he started ahead of him, but Russell, we know, is faster than Antonelli at this moment. So I don't really blame Antonelli for where he finished. If he was fourth and only just ahead of Lawson and 20 seconds behind Russell, then yeah, he should have done better. But even though he didn't finish ahead of Carlos Sainz, I don't think that's because Antonelli wasn't good enough. I think that was more so Carlos Sainz being really, really good in the race. So I think Antonelli did well enough. Yeah, we'll be disappointed he didn't get a podium. Would have been his second podium of the year. But second or fourth for Mercedes is a very good result, considering, what the results they've had lately and considering the pace of their car relative to the others in Baku. And congratulations to Mercedes in getting that podium. And they are now up to second in the championship. Can they hold on to it? We'll have to see. In Singapore, I do think there'll be a bit of a dark horse. Russell, we know, is incredibly quick around a street circuit. And that Mercedes car should be pretty handy around the Singapore circuit. So keep your eye peeled for Mercedes and George Russell. I wouldn't be surprised if Russell is snatching a top 3 on the grid, because he's got the pace himself. And I think the car will be pretty handy around that type of circuit. So keep your eye on George Russell. I think they'll have a good Singapore Grand Prix. Antonelli, of course, has never raced around there, so who knows how he'll do. Hopefully he'll do well. Before we go on to Ferrari, though, I want to go on to the two midfield teams who were pretty much front-running teams in this Grand Prix. Firstly, starting with Williams. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant drive from Carlos Sainz, finally showing up in 2025. This was similar to some performances that we saw from him in 2024. Of course, he did win a couple races in 2024. Mexico was the last one he had, and actually is still, to this date, the last win Ferrari have had in Formula 1. And this drive was similar in terms of he was just consistently very quick, got the best really out of the car, and delivered a really good result. Was a quiet race, but a great race nonetheless. So congratulations to Carlos Sainz, and hopefully now he's got this massive amount of confidence he should have after this result. We'll now see the real Carlos Sainz for the rest of the season, because Alex Albon has been brilliant, but in terms of potential, I do think Carlos Sainz has a higher ceiling than Alex Albon. Meaning that if Sainz can tap into that higher potential, then there potentially is more pace or results in this Williams car than what has been shown. Again, Albon has been great. I'm not saying Albon has not done well enough or not got the potential out of the car. He has plenty of times, but I think we would all agree that Carlos Sainz is probably more talented than Albon. So now he's got this confidence. Let's see if he can end the season well and at least get himself in the top 10 of the championship, where he really should be, given that Williams are the 5th best team on the grid. So, yeah, great result from Sainz, and congratulations to Williams for their first podium in quite a number of years. And we'll also touch on Racing Bulls, because both of their drivers were brilliant in the race. Liam Lawson also kept up a really good pace. And I have to say, for a driver that has been a bit crashy at times and done a bit too much wheel banging, defensively drove very, very well. Kept himself, importantly, ahead into certain corners when he had to. Got very good exits from turn 16 leading on to the super enormous pit straight, which allowed him to keep his 5th place. And when he needed to move offline to defend his position, he did so very well. So congratulations to Lawson for the result and a very good drive and defensive drive to finish 5th. Isaac Kadra as well. Very good drive from him, considering, remember, he had some sort of engine issue leading up to the race and got over that. Had a good start. He overtook a couple cars, I think. He at least got past Lando Norris. Did then get passed by, I think, Norris and Leclerc. But then held on to it. Did a decent pace. And again, at the end of the race, he had a very quick car, but ran out of laps to really join that fight from 5th place down to 9th. But yeah, Racing Bulls scored 11 points in that Grand Prix. Racing Bulls in the last 3 Grand Prix have scored 27 points, which is more, I believe, than Ferrari have scored by, I think, a point. So that shows you just how great they've been since the summer break. They have been, the 4th best performing team on the grid ahead of Ferrari. Let's hope they keep it up. Singapore is the next Grand Prix. They have been very good around high aero circuits. Obviously, Zandvoort was the last high aero circuit, and they got the podium. What can they do this time? We will find out. I think both drivers will definitely be top 10 runners, and I would not be surprised if they are the quickest midfield team, and maybe can get themselves, in and amongst the Red Bulls, McLarens, or maybe not the McLarens, the Mercedes, maybe the Ferraris as well. So keep your eye on Racing Bulls. They, I think, will be the dark horse, or one of the dark horses of the next Grand Prix in Singapore. And finally, we will finish up with the shit show at the Scuderia. This weekend, maybe they couldn't have won the race, but they could have at least been on the podium. They were nowhere near that, and not only nowhere near that, they were 8th and 9th in this race. After a potentially even worse qualifying, where they went, 10th and 12th. In qualifying, obviously Lewis Hamilton didn't do a good enough lap to get to Q3. Absolutely awful effort from him. Leclerc then binned it in Q3, costing himself the chance for at least a top 3 in qualifying, if not a front row. And then in the race, with both drivers, they never looked likely to finish in the top 5. Lewis Hamilton only really had pace when he went onto the medium tyre at the end. Before then, on the hard tyre, which was performing well, he had absolutely zero pace, which still baffles me because everyone else on the hard tyre was doing well except him. And then for Leclerc, just went nowhere the whole race. Apparently he did have a slight power issue that cost him about 20 horsepower in the Grand Prix. I don't think that really would have made him much of a difference. Maybe would have got him ahead of Lawson. Even if he got ahead of Lawson and finished 5th though, it still would have been a disastrous Grand Prix. Ferrari were just horrendous, really. And the performance level and pace level of this team since the summer break has been shockingly bad. And they haven't won a race this season. We know that. There is, I think at this point, considering they didn't win at Monza, didn't win in Baku, 2 tracks I really thought they could win at, it's looking very, very likely they're not going to win a race this season. But despite that, the performance level dropping so significantly to the level it is, I think Frederic Vasseur, the team principal, his job is really at risk now. Really at risk. Because at the end of the day, the team principal job, it's the same really as a football manager job. You might not be responsible for why the team is not performing, but you are responsible for the results. Because at the end of the day, sports is a results business. And if you're not getting the results, then you end up getting the hammer a lot of the time. And I would not be surprised if these results continue, mostly at least, until the end of the season. I would not be surprised if Frederic Vasseur gets the boot. from Ferrari, because you cannot, as the Ferrari team, you cannot be finishing consistently outside of the podium positions. That is, that cannot be tolerated. So we'll see where they go from here. I'm not expecting them to be good in Singapore. The only way they'll get a good result in Singapore, I think, is if the drivers really perform well. But with the way this car is right now, I don't have a lot of hope for this team. Not just for this next Grand Prix, but really for the rest of the season. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if they went winless for 2025. Again, their last win was nearly a year ago with Carlos Sainz in Mexico. And here we are, almost a year later, still no wins. Who would have thought that, considering all the expectation going into this season? But that is, unfortunately, the way where Ferrari are right now. Of course, 2026 is around the corner. Who knows what that means for Ferrari? But 2025 has been a disaster, and they are in this battle for second in the championship. But let's be honest, it doesn't matter. If they finish second, third, or fourth, it still is a failure of a season at Ferrari. End of story. And we'll see, again, what they do in Singapore. But yeah, just an absolute horror show from them yet again. But those are, I believe, all the teams that I wanted to go through in this review. Yeah, it is. And yeah, a good Grand Prix weekend it was overall. And that is it, of course, for this podcast reviewing the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Just a quick update. There won't be any content on the channel between now and the next Grand Prix in Singapore because I've now started my online master's course for screenwriting. So I will be focusing on that quite a lot in the next few weeks. There will still be content on the channel. When Grand Prix come around, I will still be streaming quite a bit. These podcasts will still be coming out. But in terms of recorded videos like the Lewis Hamilton one I did a couple of weeks ago, those will go onto the back burner probably for a couple months. And then I'll start to upload quite a lot of recorded videos probably when we get to the end of the season. So don't worry, they'll be back in a couple of months or so. But yeah, for these next few weeks, we'll just be concentrating on the Grand Prix. So the next time you'll hear from me will be Saturday, October the 4th for qualifying for the Singapore Grand Prix. And I will be live, as usual, 90 minutes before qualifying begins at 12:30 p.m. UK time for the Singapore Grand Prix qualifying session, which is the most important part of that weekend. If you get pole in Singapore, you practically won the race. It's very similar to Monaco in that way. So I'll only be doing a qualifying watch along for the next Grand Prix. Even though I'm not doing a race stream, I will still be doing the podcast the day after the race on the 6th of October. So make sure to come along to that and check out, obviously, my thoughts on whatever happens in the Singapore Grand Prix. But guys, that's it for your Azerbaijan Grand Prix review. And until the next Grand Prix and my qualifying watch along for the Singapore Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time on Saturday, the 4th of October, it has been me, Chazzer HD. Goodbye.